All right, good morning. This is chapter 11, The Triumphs and Travails of the Jeffersonian Republic. Um, this is Jefferson's presidency, and also not only Jefferson, but also Madison, and eventually it'll end with Monroe. Okay, so you have this beginning. It's called the Jeffersonian Republic because his philosophy is now going to continue, sort of like a legacy of his style of government from 1800 to 1812, right? So that's about two presidents, and then with the election coming up for Monroe. So remember, it was Federalists versus Democratic Republicans. The Federalists believed in a strong centralized government. This meant that the whole government of the United States is more important than the individual 13 state governments. But Democratic Republicans supported more of a 13 state government and keep the centralized government small. So in America, there's both. You can follow your state government, and at the same time, the centralized main government governs the entirety of America. Okay, so it's election, right? So you have here John Adams, who is going against Thomas Jefferson. Now, Thomas Jefferson is going to win this election. Now, whenever there's an election, they talk a lot of trash to each other. For example, the Navy that John Adams built didn't even go to war, so it was just sitting there. It was like a waste of money, right? How about for Jefferson? They threw some dirt saying that he had an affair with one of his slaves. And actually, through DNA testing, he did. He saw the descendants of that slave, and it was related to Jefferson. Okay, so this is a little political cartoon, Jefferson and his slave. Okay, so when they had the election, actually Jefferson tied with Aaron Burr, but Aaron Burr was not a true guy, meaning he didn't really become president for the sake of the country. He became the president for the sake of himself. He was very arrogant. He only wanted it to be because he wanted to be popular, so it would sit well with him. That's the only reason why he wanted to become president. Even though Aaron Burr was a Federalist, Hamilton didn't like him. Hamilton didn't believe Aaron Burr meant well. He felt Thomas Jefferson is a better president than Burr. Okay, so Burr became second place. He became the vice president, but even that he didn't want to do. Okay, so the election of 1800 was a revolution, and they call this election the Revolution of 1800. And that's because usually when there's a transfer of power, it's usually chaotic. Now, there was Federalists in charge, George Washington, then John Adams, and then a huge or a totally different kind of power reign was the Democratic Republicans. And you would think that there would be some chaos and anarchy and people wouldn't accept it. However, the people accepted it, and it was a peaceful transfer of power. Okay, and it was restored. So that's why they believe it's so revolutionary, because this young nation wasn't going in chaos every time they switched to another leader, to another form of power. But in Europe, it's different. Whenever there's a new king and then there's a king hiding, they go and kill the king, and then all the farmers protest, all the people get upset, they have a civil war. In Europe, there's always kings fighting each other to take the land and inheritance. But in America, this presidential system is not bad. People accept it. They don't have war. They're very, in a way, reserved and mature about switching and accepting whoever wins in the election. Okay, so who's Jefferson? So this section is just a little background about him. He's from the swampy village of Washington. Okay, and that's actually Washington D.C. was just started to be built. It used to be in Philadelphia, New York. Now the capital is finally in D.C. in the South. Okay, now Jefferson wasn't about to be like so cocky. He said, "No, we are all Republicans. We are all Federalists. Honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none." By saying that, he's basically saying, I'm willing to work both sides of the aisle. All right, I'm not trying to like destroy the Federalist Party. I'm willing to work with them, even though we're different in our philosophies or political differences. Jefferson was also really humble. He had a rule, the rule of the pell mell, which means in official dinners, he didn't sit according to rank. Now, remember, the Federalists was all about the elite stuff, so the best seat goes to them, and then so forth. Those who are not important sit in the back. But Jefferson wasn't like that. He balanced everything out. Doesn't matter about your rank. You can sit next to the president. It doesn't matter. This is very humbling because that's what he represented. He represented the farmer, the virtuous farmer. He didn't like elite people, too cocky and stuck up. He also wore house clothes when he would meet people. You know, usually when there's someone important coming, you would dress up. He just wears house clothes to show that he's just a regular guy. Okay, Jefferson was very studious. This is his study hall. Okay. Dismay of his official-seeking friends, the new president dismissed few public servants for political reasons. Patronage-hungry Jeffersonians watched the Federalist appointees grow old in office and grumbled that few die, none resign. So this is basically saying, when Jefferson becomes the president, shouldn't he fire all those who was formerly working with John Adams and who were Federalists? He did not even do that. He says, you know what, you get to stay there and just do your job. So, some people can be mean and just fire anyone in the previous office, but that's not Jefferson. Okay, and remember, he did change some laws. Like, for example, if you remember the Alien and Sedition Act under John Adams, which said like you have to be in America for at least 14 years in order to be a U.S. citizen, and if not, you get deported. And then he passed the new naturalization law in 1802, which brought down 14 years to 5 years, so people who move to America can immediately or in a short matter of time become a U.S. citizen. He hated the excise tax. That tax was on the whiskey manufacturers, and that's what caused him to do a whiskey rebellion. So he lowered it. He persuaded Congress to repeal it, and they did. He selected Albert Gallatin for his treasury. He was pretty good, just as good as Hamilton. By strict economy, succeeded in reducing it substantially while balancing the budget. So what does that mean? Is he was able to save money and pay the tax or pay the debt through taxes. Okay, so he was able to do that. He was very Jefferson didn't want to tamper with the Federalist programs that were already in place. He says, it'll still be there. I won't take it away. So remember, there's different programs, right, that they're going to have one for Federalists and one for Democratic Republicans. And if Jefferson a Democratic Republican, he could have gotten rid of all the Federalist programs that were in place during John Adams and George Washington's time, but he did not do that. Okay, the dead clutch of the judiciary. So before John Adams left, he knew that the Democratic Republicans are going to take over. Already, they are a majority in the Congress, and now you're going to have the president, who is a Democratic Republican, also going to become the majority. And now, the only thing left to keep the Federalist power in place is the judges, right? That's the last branch, the judicial branch. And so, what John Adams had a plan is to expand the number of judges to work in the Supreme Court and make them all Federalist judges. So he got a bunch of judges in. He expanded it, but he kind of turned in the papers last minute. So John Marshall wanted to work, right? But so you call this the midnight judges because right before midnight he got them all. This is a bit of John Marshall, his background, all in blue. So Marshall lived on handing down Federalist decisions. Now, one guy, William Marbury, he was supposed to become a judge, right? But James Madison didn't accept him. James Madison is a Democratic Republican Secretary of State under Thomas Jefferson, different party. John Adams selected William Marbury, different party from Jefferson. So it's Marbury from the Federalist side and Madison from the Democratic Republican side. And Marbury was supposed to be a judge, but James Madison didn't accept his application. So Marbury says, I'm going to take you to court. Marbury versus Madison. So would the judge be biased? Would the judge support Marbury? Would the judge support Madison? Which party? So finally, they had a deeper decision, bigger. Judicial review is the idea that the Supreme Court has the last word, not Marbury, not Madison, not the president, not no one else. Only the Supreme Court will decide what is constitutional or not. So this is a very big deal. So Marshall was the one that was in charge of that. Samuel Chase. Samuel Chase also was about to be impeached, but Marshall said, no, I will decide. So there's all these judges that Jefferson tried to get rid of because they were all Federalist judges. But again, John Marshall says it's not, just because he's a different party or he doesn't support you, he cannot get fired. So it was very hard for Jefferson to get rid of those. Okay, so what does Jefferson do when he's first president? What would he do? So the first thing he does is he knows he has to reduce the military. There's just so much military that John Adams built up. And what's the military for? It's merely just for going to war. So he reduces it. But he still does go to a semi-war, actually, because right here in North Africa are these pirates. A lot of these are Muslim nations. And what they would do is they would see some of the shipping and then tell the United States, hey, pay up, and then we'll give you back your ship. If you don't, then we're just going to keep your ship or even kill the people as we hold them hostage. So this poses a dilemma. The pirates of the North African Barbary states are trying to blackmail American merchant ships. Should we buy and pay them, or should we go to war? Now, George Washington and John Adams have been paying them for safe passage. Why should we pay a terrorist group for safe passage? You should declare war. So what happened is actually Jefferson didn't want to pay for safe passage, so he built up a little mosquito fleet, which he called little jets, little Navy ships, tiny gunboats, and he went to war against them. Finally, he sealed a treaty of peace in Tripoli, and he said, okay, give us all back the Americans. Do not ever do this again. Okay, so that stopped them from ever messing with America, at least at that point in time. Okay, here we go. One of the biggest accomplishments is the Louisiana Purchase. Now, Louisiana, this whole middle part of the United States, belonged to France. Okay, France had a dream. Bonaparte had the dream of getting the whole Louisiana, the middle part of America, to make it into a new French empire, right? But something happened that changed the mind of Napoleon. Remember, Napoleon Bonaparte is the sort of general / emperor of France, and he wants to do something with that huge land in the middle of America. Okay, Um, but what happened was uh, Thomas Jefferson wanted to send someone to France to buy Louisiana. Now, if you think about the state of Louisiana, that's at the bottom portion. I don't know, there's a map somewhere here. This is Louisiana, right? French own all of this in yellow here. So the whole point was we got to buy this place here because we have to make sure that the farmers in America can make way outside to trade with Europe to sell their goods. So that was the plan. So who does Thomas Jefferson sent to France to negotiate? They just wanted a little piece of that land. So he sends James Monroe and Livingston to buy New Orleans, that's the city of today's Louisiana, for 10 million. And then they were threatening, hey, if you do not, then we're going to talk to Britain. All right. So a year ago, America's kind of like bribing them or playing trying to make them compromise, or we're going to talk to their enemy. Okay. So should France give this part up? Now, something happened in the Caribbean. The French owned some Caribbean islands, and they had a huge rebellion by a man named Saint Leo Batois. In Santo Domingo, all the slaves rose up against the French colony, the French government, and they couldn't stop the French soldiers. And they stopped the French soldiers. The slaves ganged up together, formed a military, and kicked out the French government. So there was no plan for France to take care of America because if that failed, Napoleon's thinking, wow, maybe we cannot even control America. If we cannot control the slaves, then that means what makes us think we can control the middle part? It's going to be harder to take care of the middle part of America if we lose Santo Domingo, a Caribbean island. That becomes a big problem. So Robert Livingston and James Monroe, they arrived and didn't know this was happening, but the French knew that they had this rebellion, and Livingston and Monroe were saying, okay, can we just buy Louisiana? We'll give you 10 million. But then the French says, how about we'll sell you New Orleans plus all of the middle part of America. All of this just plus 5 million. They were just going to buy this part for just 10 million. But the bigger part, about 90% bigger, plus 5 million. And they made a good deal and they bought the middle part of America from the French for $15 million. Okay, it was a good deal, got it signed, kaboom. They now doubled the size of the United States. And it was so good, the deal was so good, it was like 3 cents an acre. Can you imagine 3 cents an acre? That's all you needed to get 1 acre. The size of Luke is like 10 acres. That's like what, 30 cents? Okay. So Louisiana in the long view, what does this mean? So now you have all of this territory, right? This is like a form of imperialism. It's a valley of democracy. What does this mean? That now this is a future expansion for now there's also Native Americans there, but that's even though that's their land, but French sold it, America said it's theirs. Now they're forced to begin this imperialistic attitude. Okay. Now imperialism is like empire growing, empire building. Okay. And they act like it's for the sake of democracy, to give the people their democracy, the Native Americans, even though they won't, but is to expand democracy. Okay. It's like preaching. They're going to preach democracy through empire building. That's their imperialism notion. Okay. So they're going to send Lewis and Clark, and they're going to even get a woman named Sacagawea to explore the area that they just bought. And so Lewis and Clark, there he goes, Meriwether Lewis. They see these Indians and their culture. They draw it. They even show them what they do to babies. They squeeze their head to make their head pointy as a sign of beauty. But in any case, they found a lot of things. They knew where the mountains were, which Indians to avoid, and which parts are dangerous, where the rivers are. They named some mountains after themselves, Evelyn Mount Pike. So they have all of this explored. So they have to jot it down, survey it, because they have to sell it to people who want to move there eventually. Okay, now remember Aaron Burr, the one who lost? He was supposed to be president, but then Hamilton didn't make him win because he told the people not to vote for him. So Jefferson's first term vice president, but Burr joined with a group of Federalist extremists to plot the secession of New England. Now, Burr made a lot of trouble. He told New England to secede, okay? And this is going to be a problem in the future. But we'll talk about that more later in the next chapter. Now, Burr died because he was so upset at oh no, Burr didn't die, I'm sorry. Burr challenged Hamilton to a duel. Now, Burr is not really a soldier, right? But Hamilton is. So you would think Hamilton would win. But in a duel, they take 10 paces forward, and then they turn around and they shoot, right? Like a Wild Wild West kind of thing. But Hamilton got the first shot when they flipped the coin. Hamilton missed. Then it was Burr's turn, and Burr hit him, and then Hamilton died. This is how men solve their differences. They duel, and then they shoot each other to death, and then they feel happy, and they go home happy because they just did a duel. But one of them is killed. Okay, so Burr went away because of murder, and Burr went all the way back to England, and he was even willing to work with England to even urge Napoleon, even in France, to invade America. He was so upset at America. He was actually a betrayer. The guy who wanted to become the president of the United States, he actually became the guy who wanted to destroy the United States with France and Britain. Okay. Second, the second term came up. Jefferson won again. Won again. Okay. At the Battle of Trafalgar, Horatio Lord Nelson achieved immortality by smashing the combined French and Spanish fleets off the coast of Spain. And Napoleon, the Battle of the Three Emperors, Napoleon crushed the combined Austrian and Russian armies in Europe. So England is good with the ocean, destroyed the French, but Napoleon's good with the land, destroyed the Austrian and Russian armies altogether. So they have their own tactics, their own strengths and weaknesses. So Britain ruled the waves and orders in council. So since Britain was in control, they passed these orders in council, kind of like what their parliament passed. And these edicts closed the European port. They said no one can go to a port in France. So they blocked the way, basically. And Napoleon struck back, ordering the seizure of all merchant ships, including American, that entered British ports. So they're saying no one can go to a British port. Well, no one can go to a French port. Well, we'll see which navy blocks the way. So the Americans were in trouble because they're in the middle of this war and they cannot trade because they're always being stopped or seized by the enemy of Britain or the enemy of France because Britain and France are at war with each other. So it's hard for them to make trade until an incident happened that's going to turn America against France. There's a ship called the Chesapeake. And then the British sunk it because the Chesapeake didn't want to unload. Okay. American says, no, we're not going to surrender the ship. And then the British shot it. So now we have this tension that the British made against America. So there's very close to a heated war coming up. So what is Jefferson going to do? What is Congress going to do? He passes the Embargo Act, which says, okay, fine, both of you guys are fighting. Well, we're not going to trade with anyone. So America said, like, you guys want a good so much, so we're not going to trade with anyone. That's your fault. Well, what makes you think people want America's goods? What makes you think that Europeans will be like, oh man, we can't get America's goods anymore? Actually, they said, it's okay. We're just going to deal with it. We don't need your goods. It's your loss because you can't get money. So because no one could trade, people had to smuggle again, just like in the times when they were under Britain. They smuggled mainly in the Canadian border. New England was upset because they lost a lot of money and they needed to trade with Britain. New England did a smuggling with Canada, kind of sneak in. Now, because of this Embargo Act to stop trading with other countries, actually, America suffered the most. They couldn't make money. So then they said, okay, fine, Non-Intercourse Act. We will trade with everyone else except Britain and France. All right, Britain and France, we will not trade with you, but everyone else we can trade again. So Jefferson made a mistake. He should have just said that in the beginning, but he didn't. Okay. So now what's going to happen is James Madison will now become the president. Madison, okay, right here. So Jefferson didn't become the president the next time, and now they passed Macon's bill. America said, we're going to trade with Britain and France. We're going to trade with everyone again. But whoever stops our trade between Britain and France will become our enemy. So you better allow us, you better respect neutrality, you better respect our shipping, but whoever messes with any of our ships is going to be our enemy. So America started trading. Shameful capitulation is practically admitting the United States could not survive without one of the belligerents as a commercial ally, but it left determination of whose ally would it be. So whoever doesn't attack America will become the ally. Whoever attacks American shipping will become the enemy. Who do you think is going to become the ally? Britain or France? So what happened was the terms of Macon's bill gave the British 3 months to live up to their implied promise by revoking the orders of trade, orders of council, and reopening the Atlantic. But they did not. London, America still didn't respect, and France respected America. So France is now the ally of America, and Britain, England is the enemy. They did not stop or change their ways with taking shipping away. Okay, so now Britain already is purposefully making trouble. They even made some trouble with the Warhawks. This is the Native Americans. So they incited or provoked the Shawnee brothers to come say they had a confederacy, and they said, hey, the British said to the natives, do not work with the Americans. They took your land away, remember? This upset the Americans. Okay. So they had a war. William Henry Harrison, future president, he's the governor of Indiana at this time. He is going to go to the Indians to have a battle with them, the Battle of Tippecanoe. and they drove to come see. Now, whose fault is this for starting it? It was the Indians. They had a prophet. They said the prophet dreamed that they were going to kick out the white people. So they fought. The prophet was wrong. They lost, actually. That's the battle of Tippecanoe. Okay, so Madison goes to war because against Britain because one of what happened with the Chesapeake incident. Two, the British still taking the ships, and three, they're also the British are provoking the Indians to attack America. So they all people in Congress wanted to go to war on to Canada. So they had the war for the last time. Did war and fever. Madison asked Congress to declare war, and southern and western states, their representatives voted for war, except the Federalists in both North New England. So this is Madison's war, and so war was declared, and they're about to go to war with Britain. So, but then the British people are in Canada, so the first step is having a war with Canada. So America had to fight two enemies simultaneously: the Old England and the New England, because the New England people didn't want, it supported actually the English. Okay, so this is chapter 11. All right, so this is chapter 12, the Second War of Independence and the Upsurge of Nationalism. Now, this war is usually called the War of 1812. This War of 1812 is the second fight with Britain. Of course, not for independence, they're already independent, but I guess this independence means kind of like not getting help from France, and America's going to fight the war again with Britain and actually succeed in the sense of not being completely destroyed and actually have a tie with Britain in the end. So we're going to see how that goes. Now, just some background information. Remember how in Macon's Bill, they wanted to be neutral, but England didn't want to be neutral and still seized ships. France says, okay, we're not going to take your ships. So France became the friend of America, while England again became the enemy. Okay, so this neutrality could barely hold things together. Okay, so this is the spark for this nationalism in America. Now they were going to have a battle, and of course they're going to fight the British people, and the British people are more or less in Canada. So if you're going to fight England, you can't go to England Island, first. You got to go to Canada first because that's where the British are. And so that means all these middle cities, Detroit, Niagara, Lake Champlain, that's where America's going to try to do a three-pronged invasion. However, they're going to fail at this three-pronged invasion. This is the border of Canada and America. This is Detroit, Niagara, and Montreal, and they're going to be pushed back. Okay. The British and Canadians displayed energy from the outset. Early in the war, they captured the American fort, Michilimackinac. So the British captured that American fort. And it was really because they had good generals. The British had Isaac Brock, General Mudd, General Confusion. Okay, so they were professional generals. When several American land invasions of Canada were again hurled back in 1813, American craft on the whole were more skillfully handled, had better gunners, and were manned by non-pressed gang crews who were burning to avenge numerous indignities. Okay, so what did America have? Who were our guys? We had a ship called Constitution, and because it was called Old Ironsides, had thicker sides, heavier firepower, meaning that iron on the side of the ship. And they had a good officer, Oliver Hazard Perry. Okay. And he won in the case, very famous in the Great Lakes Battle, the Battle of the Thames. Okay. And then in Europe, Napoleon was destroyed in 1814. Now, in the middle of the War of 1812, America could have had a better chance because the British forces were split, meaning there was some in fighting against Napoleon, and there was some fighting in America, but the British defeated the French army, so now they could shift over a lot of British troops in towards America. So the British prepared a huge landing. Okay, they were going to get a lot of people. In the meantime, a weaker American fleet, Thomas McNew, the ensuing battle was desperately. Oh, it's kind of loading here. So they had a battle in Plattsburgh. McNew had a good strategy. He was pretending he was being chased, but he actually wasn't. He threw down his anchor and then made him do a full rotation, and then he was able to go behind the enemy instead. So this is part of his strategy, right? To instead chase the enemy instead of the enemy chasing him. So that was America, a very famous battle. Now, the British were a formidable force. There was a group of British that went to D.C. and burned Washington, D.C. They were bombing it, and and then actually while the Capitol was being bombed, there was a guy in a ship, an American, who wrote about this bombing, and that was Francis Scott Key, and that's where we have the Star Spangled Banner. That's why you hear the lyrics like and the and the bombs in air, the flag's still there. That's actually written about the war in 1814. Okay, and the third British blow aimed at New Orleans. So it's like they were going to pretty much try to jump America at all sides, from Canada, from DC, and also down south. But Andrew Jackson, a young guy before, remember, he's a future president at this time, he was able to defend the South. Okay, so we're going to see that. So there were 8,000 British people, and Jackson had regulars, pirates, militiamen, about 400 of them. You know, maybe a small force, maybe almost to 1,000. But the British people lost. They lost 2,000 men because Jackson trapped them in a swamp and started bombarding them all the way. Okay. Now, because the Americans defeated a bigger British force, now they could focus all their forces back at DC and back at Canada, and probably they would have defeated Canada. But here was the problem. They already sent a peace delegation to Europe to have peace with the British because they thought they weren't going to win. They wanted peace. But in fact, if they didn't send that, they probably would have gotten Canada. So the problem is that communication wasn't, they didn't have a cell phone and then say, hey, guys, turn around, don't make peace. We're going to take Canada. Maybe we would have had Canada as a number of states, right? Treaty of Ghent. Tsar Alexander I of Russia proposed mediation between the clashing Anglo-Saxon cousins in 1812. Okay, so this guy wanted to make peace with them. Okay, so they signed it, Treaty of Ghent. Quincy Adams was there, Henry Clay was there. Okay, the Treaty of Ghent signed on Christmas Eve. Both sides agreed to stop fighting and restore conquered territory. So pretty much they said, let's give everything back to what it was. If America just kept going, they would have gotten more territory, like I said, Canada. Okay, so it was a virtual draw. But being a draw was a big victory for America. To have a draw with a very powerful nation and not lose, that's actually, in a sense, like a victory for America, because now America got more respect. Okay. So this war showed the death of the Federalist Party. Remember, there was two parties, the Federalist Party and the Democratic Party. The Federalist Party believed in strong centralized government, and they were concentrated in New England. New England is in Massachusetts. It has Vermont. It has New Hampshire. All those places, Connecticut, are called New England, and most of them are Federalists. Now, these New Englanders were actually traitors, blue light Federalists, treacherous New Englanders, who supposedly flashed lanterns on the shore so that British cruisers would be alerted. Now, why would the New England people be working with the British? Because of trade. They want to do some trade, like, hey, let's trade. But these guys thought that the new people of New England, the Americans, thought, these New England Americans thought the Americans were going to lose. They were already signing a deal, like they had a meeting in Hartford, Connecticut, and they felt like, we lost. New Orleans is going to be captured. There's so much people that's going to be killed. So let's go leave the United States. So they actually proposed that if the American government doesn't give us what we want, then we're going to leave and form a new country. So the North threatened to secede from America, And so what did they say? It demanded, saying, if you don't want us to leave, then you have to accept these proposals. First, you got to have a vote, 2/3 vote in Congress before any embargo would be imposed. All right, remember Thomas Jefferson proposed an embargo, stop trading, and he just decided that by himself. He says, no, that has to be the Congress. And new states admitted or war declared need to have 2/3 vote. Delegates sought to abolish the 3/5 clause in the Constitution. Remember how the African Americans, they counted them as part of the population, even though they can't vote? They said no, because there's too much population in the South. They were able to send more representatives. Therefore, when there's more representatives, they could vote for more things in the Congress. And they also wanted to get rid of 2 successive presidents from the same state. Why? What's wrong with having a president from the same state successively? Because the Virginia dynasty, which they called it, was dominating the presidencies for a few years. Thomas Jefferson, actually George Washington from Virginia, and then after that, a few years later, Thomas Jefferson from Virginia, James Madison from Virginia, James Monroe from Virginia. All of these guys are from Virginia, and the New England says, we don't like that. We want that rule changed. No one should come from the same state. So New England was trying to give the American government an ultimatum. You better follow these proposals, or else we are not going to join the United States. And this shows New England people who are going to jump into King Louis' arms, the Hartford Convention. Leap or no leap? Should these New Englanders join England or not? Work with England or not? The Hartford resolutions, that turned out, were the death dirge of the Federalist Party. Now, why did that die? Because the Federalists set this up. They thought they were going to lose. And then when they realized, when they walked down to D.C., everyone's celebrating that they didn't lose. Actually, there was a draw. And actually, they defeated New Orleans, the British there. They were pretty embarrassed. And then people saw them as backstabbers. You were trying to leave America because you had no faith in us defending ourselves, and no one wants to be a Federalist after that point on. Okay, so that was called the Second War of Independence. That's really the War of 1812. There was now sectionalism, now identified with discredited New England Federalists, was dealt a black eye. In a sense, the most conspicuous casualty of the war was the Federalist Party, Andrew Jackson, William Henry Harrison. Okay, the Rush-Bagot Agreement between Britain and the United States. They also made this treaty between the Canadians to limit the number of Navy there. Okay. So, nationalism. This is the spirit of nation consciousness or national oneness. Washington Irving, James Fenimore Cooper, significantly as the nation's finest writers of importance to use the British themes and themes. North American Review. So this is a new publication that America started to write. Now, because they won, they revived the Bank of the United States. Remember, Hamilton and Jefferson were arguing about this. Is this constitutional or not? But then they revived it. America got very proud, nationalistic. Stephen Decatur was able to overcome the Barbary Pirates at 1812. Okay. The American system. Okay. Henry Clay. This guy, you have to remember him. He's not a president, though he tried to be, but he is responsible for keeping the nation together at a time when North and South could have fought against each other earlier than expected, but he tried to unite together by having some compromises, North and South. Okay. So Henry Clay knew that America was at the brink of going against each other, but it could be powerful if they worked together. Now, why weren't they working together? Because they're different economically. So let's go see how he planned to do this. Henry Clay wanted to reduce the tariff of 1816. Okay. Not really reduce it. He wanted to pass it, actually. The first tariff in American history, primarily for protection, not revenue. Its rates roughly 20 to 25%. Now, what does this mean for protection? To protect America's economy. How does high tariffs protect America's economy? Like this. If you make it expensive for nations to come in to trade with America, you have to pay a high tax, then they're not going to come in. Okay, how does that protect America? It protects America's business. What do you mean? Because the Americans cannot buy foreign products, French goods. They now could only buy American products. That's how the money would stay in America. So that's one of it. So what's this American system? How would it unite the North and the South and even the West all together? Okay, the system had three main parts. It began with a strong banking system, which would provide easy and abundant credit. A protective tariff. When you use the word protect, it means to protect the industries. Third was a network of roads and canals that would be from the East Coast to Ohio, so they could transport foodstuff and raw materials south and west to north and east easier, thus knitting the country together economically and politically. All of these is his plan, the American system. Okay. If you have a Bank of the United States, a lot of money in there, then you could give loans more, right? Because you have a lot of money to lend. So that's why Henry Clay wanted to do that. But it's going to have the private banks suffer because they won't have money. Congress voted $1.5 million to the states for internal improvements, but President Madison vetoed it. The question is, why would he veto or prevent it from being passed? Why would he be against internal improvements? When you think about it, it's not fair. You would give money to Ohio, but not other states. They don't have to pay for their transportation while other states have to pay for their transportation. That's why he felt this is unfair. So you have to remember this. Madison was against internal improvements, meaning the building of roads, the building of canals. So Jeffersonian Republicans choked on the idea of direct federal support of interstate internal improvements. They choked on the idea. Why would Jeffersonian Republicans be against this? Because money is going to them. Okay. So the president after Madison is James Monroe, nominated by the Democratic Republicans. Now, don't be confused with Republicans because of like what Trump is and whatever. That's not the kind of Republican. Actually, this is the ancestor of the Democrats. Okay. So when Monroe became president, it was known as the era of good feelings. Now, this was just printed in a newspaper that was very famous for calling it the era of good feelings because Monroe, at a time when America was divided, right? South and Virginians were all Southerners, in the North, they were like not becoming the South. Monroe went to the North, New England, and toured it, basically. Had a tour, spoke to them. People felt, this Southerner, he's not that bad. He's a great guy. So this is the era of good feelings. Okay. Even though he was against it. Now, something happened. Panic of 1819, deflation, depression, bankruptcies. So whenever there is a economic problem for everyone, a recession, a depression, or a panic, that's what it's all called. It's something to do with Great Depression, bankruptcies, banks are closing, people are getting unemployed, and people are starving, okay? Now, how does this happen? It happens whenever the banks, people don't pay back their loans, and it all happens at the same time. But how does that connect to economy or jobs? Because people are not profiting. No one's buying their products, so they can't pay back their loans. So it's all connected in one big circle. If you don't pay back the bank, and then the bank just lost money. But how can people pay back the bank if they lost their job if they're not making profit? Okay, so this was the panic of 1819. Okay, but as the West grew, more states started coming in because people are moving to the West, and then 9 states had been joined in, including Kentucky, Tennessee, and those states, right? So people are now moving towards West, settling there. People took advantage of people moving into the West. What is glib speculators? People would buy a bunch of land, not to live in it, buy it at a cheap price or at a price, and then sell it double, triple to people who wants to get it. That's what you call a speculator. People do that. They buy land and then they sell it for a higher price. That's how they make money. Noteworthy was the Cumberland Road, began in 1811, which ran ultimately from Western Maryland. That's a big road. The Land Act authorized a buyer to purchase 80 acres, virgin acres, meaning untouched land, for $1.25 an acre in cash. Finally, the West demanded cheap money issued by its own wildcat banks and fought the powerful Bank of the United States to attain its goal. Okay, sectional tensions involving rivalry between the slave South and the free North over control of the becoming West. Okay, now there is going to be the beginning of the tension. This is 1824. People are moving in, right? But here is the problem. When you move to a state, or when you move to a territory, it becomes a state. But you have to create a law if you want to allow slavery or not. Now, Congress was already saying no slavery should be in this place. That's a Talmadge amendment. From now on, we should stop slaves. But the North had 11 free states who didn't have slaves, and the Southerners had 11 slave states. If Missouri comes in, it's going to ruin the balance. They'll have 12 free states or 12 slave states and 11 of the other. So this idea to balance 11, 11, 10, 10, 12, 12, 13, 13 is this balance issue of North and South to become fair. Okay, so Missouri was going to be a slave state. So then to make it balanced, they changed Massachusetts in the northwest, the northeast part of the United States, and they changed it to Maine. So now it's 13, 13, or 12, 12. Okay, and the idea is this. Missouri will become a slave state, but everything after the 3630 has to be a free state and so forth with the rest of the area. Now, of course, when you look at this, it's like, wow, the North got a big deal. They have a lot of territory. They can have more free states. The South has a small one, so in the future, this Arkansas territory will become Arkansas state, not much. So they cannot send more politicians to D.C., but just wait for this in the future. We're going to take this, right? You know this, also this part. So there will be more states coming in the future. So the South won the prize of Missouri. Missouri became a slave state, and the idea is 3630, except Missouri was forever closed to the blight of slavery. So they thought that this Missouri Compromise would seal the deal. This is a very important term, okay, the Missouri Compromise. You have to know exactly, because that is the first compromise of many, and that's the beginning of the balancing. Okay. Okay, now we have a very complicated court case here. McCullough versus Maryland, Cohen versus Virginia, Gibbon versus Ogden. So what's this about? This is about the state government who is suing the central government or the big government over them all, and they're both suing each other, vice versa. Suing means prosecuting, charging, taking them to court. I'm going to take Maryland to court. I'm going to take the whole United States to court, something like that. So the problem is there's two kinds of powers, right? There's state government power, and then there's centralized government power. And which one has the dominant say? Which is more important, the state or the big government? Okay, state government or the national government, basically. Is it national or state? So McCullough versus Maryland is an example. So Maryland had a plan. Maryland wanted to destroy the branch of the Bank of the United States. So there's a Bank of the United States in Maryland, but Maryland had a plan. I'm going to make this Bank of the United States pay taxes, Maryland taxes. Okay, so basically I could raise the price against this bank who's in my land, and I could even kill it because I can make my tax high. So McCullough versus Maryland. McCullough sued and Maryland lost because you cannot tax the national government. You cannot tell the national government to pay taxes. You cannot tell anything that's public to pay taxes. John Marshall said this is, it's the right to keep it there. So the state government lost. Another, Cohen versus Virginia. Cohen's found guilty by the Virginia courts of illegally selling lottery tickets. But the point was this: states lost because Marshall said the Supreme Court has the right to discuss federal powers. Here's another one, Steamboat case, Gibbons versus Ogden. Okay, so the suit grew out of an attempt by the state of New York to grant to a private concern a monopoly of waterborne commerce between New York and New Jersey. So New York tried to do this, to say, hey, you can use this license and go to New Jersey. Okay, but the license is only for rivers in New York. But he says, no, I want to say that I have power over New Jersey, and you could also use this in New Jersey. Does New York have the right to do that? No. New York lost. The national government has the right to decide licenses. Okay. Same thing with here, Fletcher versus Peck. A Georgia legislature swayed by bribery granted 35 million acres in the Yazoo River County to private speculators. The next legislature, yielding to an angry public outcry, canceled the crooked transaction. So they tried to sell this, and the state said, no, cancel it. This is bad. But John Marshall said, you don't have the right to do that. Okay. So Marshall presided decreed that the legislative grant was a contract, and the Constitution forbids state laws from impairing. The state cannot cancel anything. Only the government could cancel something. The Supreme Court has the right. So the Supreme Court can now invalidate any laws that the state makes. So you can see how the national government is saying that the state government is weaker and cannot decide something without the national government. Again, Dartmouth College versus Woodward. The college had been granted a charter by King George, but the Democratic New Hampshire state legislature had seen fit to change it. They wanted to change the charter. But again, George Marshall comes in. You cannot change contracts. You don't have that power. The Dartmouth decision had the unfortunate effect of safeguarding businesses. So if a business makes a contract, the state cannot stop it. Again, the state tries to do something, Judge Marshall cancels it out. Again, weakening. Okay, so what do we summarize of all of this? Marshall's decisions are even felt today in the sense of nationalism was the most tenaciously enduring era. He buttressed the federal union and helped to create a stable national uniform environment for business, right? He protected the businesses. Marshall checked the power of elected state legislatures. He put them in check. Any state legislature tries to sue or whatever, I'm going to put you in check, Marshall says. So controlling the state's power and limiting them. And so Marshall single-handedly shaped the Constitution along conservative lines, meaning conservative is supporting centralized government. And through him, the conservative Hamiltonians lived, even though Hamilton died, but the idea still continued. Okay, some diplomacy now, sharing Oregon and acquiring Florida. Okay, so they made a deal. Oregon is on this northwest part. Now, Oregon contains today's Washington State and Oregon, right? Who gets it? Do the British get it? So they said, let's go share it for 10 years and we'll decide later because there's too much things to know. We don't know who lives where and it takes time to study it and explore, which is British territory, which is American territory. But at least let's do this. They're going to get this land, make a straight line, and they're going to give this to the British, and then we'll take this from the British. And this will become the United States. That's how we got that straight line there. But the real interesting case is Florida. Now, we don't get Florida, okay, because that belonged to Spain. So John Adams was the Secretary of State, and he was a good negotiator. So Monroe administration negotiated the much underrated Treaty of 1818. This pact permitted Americans to share this is a treaty with Britain to share this area. But okay, this is what we're talking about. Spanish Florida and West Florida. Congress ratified the grab in 1812 during the War of 1812 against Spanish allies. So we took West Florida because the Spanish lost, because the Spanish supported the British. And then how are we going to take all of Florida? Here's what we're going to do. This is how we're going to take Florida. Andrew Jackson is chasing some runaway slaves into Spanish territory, Florida. And then he went in. The Spanish said, you can go in and get those criminals, but that's all you do. Do not mess with our government, whatever. Instead, as he was chasing the slaves, Andrew Jackson takes St. Mark's, and then he takes Pensacola. He deposes the Spanish government. So, Andrew Jackson broke the rules. And what does the Spanish government say about this? Hey, watch our guy. He's taking this and that. Sorry, we couldn't control him. He just started taking away Spanish governors and whatever. Okay. How about this? Since this Andrew Jackson already made a mess of things down there, how about we buy Florida from you? So the Spanish were frustrated, had no choice, sold Florida to America, thanks to the wild, uncontrollable Andrew Jackson. Now, of course, maybe they let Andrew Jackson loose to do all that in Florida to take it anyway. Okay, the menace of monarchy in America. The world must be made safe from democracy. So a lot of the world is worried about democracy, right? Kind of things that America had. But in this world, actually, they're throwing away the old world of monarchy, of kings and queens, and they're starting to look like America's style of government. So Italy and Spain, they're having rebellions. Even Russia, Prussia, Austria, France are all getting rid of their autocratic kings. So this is happening all over the world. Russia is growing too. They start getting Alaska, or starting to get Alaska. America didn't get Alaska yet. Okay, they're going to get it from the Russians, but Russia is slowly creeping down, even to San Francisco, even to California. So they're expanding. Okay, a lot of the nations are expanding their territory. So Monroe passes his doctrine called the Monroe Doctrine. Okay, Monroe Doctrine is this: no one. He's basically speaking to all the world. No one should colonize and intervene in North, Central, or South America's affairs. Okay, now what was happening? Europeans were trying to mess around in Central South America to have an excuse, a pretense to come in and take some territory. For example, if Mexico doesn't pay their bill to the British, then British says, because you didn't pay your bill, we're going to take your territory. America says, we're not going to let them come in. Maybe the Spanish were thankful, right, that the Americans were going to protect them. But basically, America saying, Monroe is saying, this is my side of the neighborhood, this side of the continent. You cannot come in, you cannot touch it. This is the Monroe Doctrine. This is America saying, I claim the right to this side of the world, North, Central, and South America. If you educate Latin Americans, they knew of the message, and they generally recognized that the British Navy, not the paper pronouncement of James Monroe, stood between them and a hostile Europe. So James Monroe is starting to decide this. You can see. Okay, here's a map here: British Canada, United States, and Oregon Territory was there. Sure, disputed. Russo-American Treaty. They fixed 5440, the southern tip of Alaska. They said this is your Russian side, this is American side. The Monroe Doctrine was a self-defense doctrine. Okay, do not come in here. This is our territory. Okay. Okay, so this is America's style. This is actually isolationism. Okay, Monroe Doctrine, the self-defense doctrine, is an isolationist kind of policy. Meaning we don't want anything to do with Europe, so don't do anything with us. Okay, if we're not bothering you, then don't bother us. If we're not messing around in Europe, then don't mess around in America. Let's be separated. That's this isolationistic attitude of America. Okay, all right. So that's it for today. All right. Good morning. We are now in chapter 13, the rise of democracy. 1824 to 1840. So this is a huge time period of 16 years. All right. And so basically the Democrats, the Democratic Republicans are now splitting in two ways. Okay. So we remember how it was originally Monroe, James Monroe, who became president. But then after that, there's going to be a split in the party because it's going to be John Quincy Adams who will become the president. And then Henry Clay is going to make a deal. Just know that in this election, it's John Quincy Adams versus Henry Clay versus Crawford and Andrew Jackson. Now, Crawford's going to die. So then that leaves these three running against each other. John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay combine and they say, hey, why don't Henry Clay, you become Secretary of State? Since if you let me become president, John Quincy Adams, that is, then Henry Clay will become Secretary of State. So this pulls the votes all together enough to beat Andrew Jackson. Okay, so eventually Henry Clay became Secretary of State. John Quincy Adams then won the presidency. Jackson lost. So this is known as the corrupt bargain. So you can see the percentage here that these two combined took all the votes. Okay, 31 plus Clay's is 43, enough to beat them. Okay, so John Quincy Adams, this is him. They had the images already there. He doesn't really do anything great. He was actually better as a Secretary of State than he would become president. Okay, during his entire administration, he removed only 12 public servants in the payroll. He urged Congress to construct roads and canals, propose a national university, and support for astronomical observatory. Basically, he wasted a lot of money, right? He wasted a lot of money. While Georgians wanted the Cherokees out, the ruggedly honest Adams attempted to deal fairly with the Indians. So he was trying to befriend the Indians when the people in Georgia wanted to kick them out of their state. Okay, so that's what he does for 4 years. Then the next election, 1828, now you have a split. Because of this court bargain, now Jackson's able to separate these Democratic Republicans. Now you have the National Republicans by Adams, and you have a Democratic Republican led by Andrew Jackson. Now, Andrew Jackson represented the farmer in the South and West, and then Henry Clay and Adams represented the New England. So who is going to go against who? Is Jackson going to go against Henry Clay? So again, there's some trash, they're throwing mud at each other, talking about how Jackson is a gambling guy. He kills people through duels, while Adams is known as actually he's not really known just for wasting money. Okay, so by looking at this, Jackson wins. Jackson wins and beats Adams. Finally, Old Hickory, the guy who's brawling and cockfighting, he won this election. So that's just a lot about him. Now, he starts the spoil system. This is when he rewards those who supported him. He gave them jobs. Back then, there was no civil service commission, meaning that there was no time where you can take a test, they interview, stuff like that. No, if you won, you get to fire whoever was in office, and you get to give your supporters, those family members or friends who voted for you, they can get the job now. So this is kind of a very scandalous thing. It's crazy because actually Andrew Jackson hired even the most incompetent and uneducated people in the office and corrupted. They even stole money from the government. So that's Andrew Jackson, the guy from the South, using it. Okay. And then there was this tariff again. Remember, the tariff it forces people to pay foreigners to pay a high price to protect the American industries. So Americans could buy American products instead of the expensive foreign products. But this had an effect with the Southern people. If foreigners are scared to come to America because it's too expensive, then that means the people in the South cannot get customers. So every time they raise the tariff, they scare away such customers for the South. So while the wool and textile industries were booming, the Southerners were suffering. So Howard and Jacksonite now played a cynical political game. They promoted a high tariff bill, expecting to be defeated, which would give a black eye to the president. Okay, so this tariff of abominations, John C. Calhoun was very much against this. Okay, because it's forcing the South to be under the North, to only buy things from the North. This is why he was so upset. So they didn't want to pay this high tariff. They didn't want to accept this high tariff. And if they didn't, John C. Calhoun, going a stride beyond the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, bluntly, explicitly proposed that the states nullify the tariff. He's basically saying, we're not going to follow it. We're going to do whatever we want. And so he said he's going to nullify it. He's going to cancel it out altogether, at least in his state of Kentucky and Virginia. Well, in South Carolina, that is. Just like what they did with Kentucky and Virginia resolutions with the Alien Sedition Acts under John Adams, they want to do the same thing in South Carolina. So they were called the nullifiers, and they wanted to nullify the expensive tariff of 1832. Okay? And so what would happen? Is it okay to just not follow whatever the law does to a state? The convention threatened to take South Carolina out of the Union. So they had a meeting in South Carolina, and they said, in this meeting, in this convention, if they force us, we're going to leave the United States. So they actually threatened to secede. The South threatened to leave. Now, would Andrew Jackson have that? Okay, even though Henry Clay tried to, hey guys, let's work together and come up with a compromise bill, but still, Henry Clay was able to pull something off. Tariff of 1833 squeezed in, and it was a gradual decrease. And within 8 years, they would lower the tariff. Congress, though, still wanted to pass something, the Force Bill. The Force Bill is to give the president the authority to use the Army or Navy if South Carolina didn't want to pay their tariff taxes. Okay. So what did South Carolina do? There's military coming in, so they organized a militia. Okay. And Columbia Convention met again, repealed the ordinance of nullification. Neither Jackson nor the Nullies won a clear-cut victory. So in a way, there was a tie between the South Carolina and Andrew Jackson. Okay, but one thing that's really memorable is this Trail of Tears. Now, east of the Mississippi River, there are 125 Native Americans living there. Okay, the Cherokee and so forth. And a lot of the Native Americans, in a sense, adapted to become American. They were Americanized, or they were in a way civilized, Christianized, and they weren't roaming around. They bought land, and then they built farms. I think they made a lot of money just following the way of life like the Americans. And so the Cherokees of Georgia gave up their Indian ways and learned the American ways, learned American education, opened missionary schools, had a Cherokee National Council, they wrote their own constitution with executive, legislative, judicial branches. Cherokees made more money than even the cotton planters. So there's 1,300 black slaves toiled even for the Native Americans. So they were even acting like masters and having their own slaves. And there was 5 civilized tribes. They were living in eastern Mississippi. They were doing too well until the Georgia legislature declared the Cherokee Tribal Council illegal and tried to take their own land from them. So Jackson also wanted to take the land, right? And John Marshall said, no, that's their land. Remember, Judge George Marshall? But Jackson responded, John Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it. So this is kind of messed up. Marshall doesn't enforce anything, but the president does. So even though Marshall said that was wrong, the president still acted, and he passed the Indian Removal Act, uprooted 100,000 Indians. A lot of them were killed along the way. Okay. And so where did they put them? They put them in Indian territory here. Now, of course, the Sauk and the Fox, they had battles, and they were even trying not to move, but then these guys who led them out were Lieutenant Jefferson Davis of Mississippi and Captain Abraham Lincoln. These guys were leaders in leading these guys out and having war against them. These guys are future presidents in their own ways. Jefferson of the Confederacy, and of course, in sort of illegitimate presidency. And Captain Abraham Lincoln, obviously, he's going to be the 16th president. Okay, how about the Seminole Indians? They tried to run away in the Everglades, and they fought a guerrilla warfare. They didn't want to leave their home. So about 4/5 of them were moved to present-day Oklahoma, where several thousand of the tribes survived. Trail of Tears. 4,000 Cherokees died on the journey. Can you imagine this? No place to eat and sleep, pack whatever. They died in winter time. So, and Jackson is also known for this. The Bank War. Now, Jackson did not like the Bank of the United States because it had all the money and no bank could exist because no one would put their money in any new private bank that would exist. So this is kind of unfair, right? It's like they automatically would become the better. So they had a bank war. Daniel Webster and Henry Clay presented Congress with a bill to renew the Bank of the United States. Clay wanted to renew it 4 more years, but Jackson was going to veto it. Okay. So this is a famous picture of Jackson versus the bank, and they're trying to empty out all the money and put it into private banks. Henry Clay, Daniel Webster, and John C. Calhoun. Jackson acted as though he regarded the executive branch as superior to the judicial branch. The old general growled privately, "The bank is trying to kill me, but I will kill it." So he vetoed it. Okay, next election again. Andrew Jackson versus Clay. Now, Andrew Jackson is known to be part of the Freemason, the Mason Party, and the Masons are known and believed to be in a lot of conspiracies in some order to control the whole world, right? Okay, and of course the churches are against that because they believe that that is an end times prophecy, and they believe that that's going to happen. So there was an anti-Mason party. So whoever was a Freemason was part of this program and plan to rule the world through money, but the evangelical Protestant groups were going against them. Excuse me. So they felt like these Masons were trying to take away their religious freedoms. The anti-Masons were mainly the group of national Republicans. Okay. All right. So still, Andrew Jackson won. So finally, the Bank of the United States wasn't approved. So Jackson had to remove all the money and put them in pet banks. So the Bank of the United States had so much money, put it in pet banks or wildcat banks, to mean the same thing, smaller banks, and they put it down on there. Okay. Okay, the birth of the Whig Party. So the National Republicans now formed the Whig Party, and the Democratic Republicans just formed the Democrats. A Whig, namely chosen to recollect 18th century British Revolutionary American opposition to monarchy. Okay, they're the ones that were against the king because they called President Jackson a king, right? So just like the old times, that was the Whig Party. Who were the Whigs? Henry Clay, Webster, and Calhoun. They were the Whig Party, kind of supporting the Clay system. Southern states' writers offended by Jackson's stand on nullification. The large northern industrialists and merchants, and eventually many of the evangelical Protestants associated with the anti-Masonic party. These are the ones that joined the Whig Party. So now it's the Whig Party versus the Democrats. Okay, the names have changed, and now that's who they are. And then in the next election, Andrew Jackson didn't run. Martin Van Buren, his vice president, becomes the president. He tries to go against William Henry Harrison, but he loses. Harrison doesn't win. Van Buren he wins. He's called the Little Magician. Very close race. Martin Van Buren, the 8th president. Okay, so actually Martin Van Buren came at a bad time. So right when he became president, remember when Andrew Jackson got the Bank of the United States, got rid of, and then he tried to tell people to use the private banks, but there was a problem with that. The private banks couldn't find a way to get money into their banks. So one way Andrew Jackson tried to do is to tell them to pay with hard money, which they didn't have. So eventually the banks couldn't give out loans, and then it led to grain prices were being forced so high, and banks were starting to close, so there was a great panic. They called for the expansion of bank credit, higher tariffs, and subsidiaries for internal improvements, but it wasn't enough to solve this problem. Okay. After long, prolonged struggle, the Independent Treasury Bill passed Congress in 1840, repealed the next year by victorious Whigs. So they're trying to revive the bank again. Okay, now let's talk about a little bit of Texas. Many people went to Texas, which was pretty much owned by Mexico. One of them was Stephen Austin. He got a bunch of land, and a lot of Americans were going into Mexico, right? Not like today, they're trying to get into America, but it's the other way. Americans were going into Texas because of their land and the cattle that's living there. But there was a condition. The immigrants who were going to Mexico had to convert to the Roman Catholic faith and not have slavery, follow their rules. The Texans Americans started to increase by 30,000. Famous people like David Crockett, Jim Bowie. So there's a lot of Americans, more than Mexicans or Tejanos, that's what you would call these people in Texas. So Sam Houston used to be the governor there. And then the Texans refused to follow the rules. They still brought in slaves and they still snuck them in. So Stephen Austin goes to Mexico City to tell the Mexican dictator, who is their president in a way, Santa Anna, can I have more rights in Texas, even more freedom? But he put Santa Anna in prison, and this led to a rebellion of Texas. Texas is not allowed to have some freedom. Santa Anna said so, and so Santa Anna sent the army to San Antonio, and the Texans had to defend themselves. Unfortunately, they all died in this place called the Alamo. So Sam Houston was leading an army in Texas, and he went to look for Santa Anna. And finally, he prepared a great spot to fight Santa Anna, and Sam Houston won, even though his army was smaller. So he defeated Santa Anna in the Battle of San Jacinto, and finally, he forced Santa Anna to sign over Texas to Sam Houston, and now Texas became a country. It wasn't part of the United States yet. That's why when you go to Lone Star, it's called the Lone Star because it's the star alone from the flag, the rest from the 50 stars, which represent 50 states. So this means that Texas is now a country on its own, but eventually it's going to become part of the United States. Election of 1840 comes in. William Henry Harrison, finally, the first Whig president. He defeats Martin Van Buren and becomes the first Whig president. John Tyler is his partner to become the vice president, and they're able to win. So now you have the first Whig president. However, something happens. So before we talk about that, the first triumph of the populists. So what happened was so different is this Democratic Party that Jackson helped create in a way was that it made up of people of the farmers and the middle class people. Okay, so this is and his style was very different from so-called elite New England people or national Republicans, what they call themselves. So there was a change in the two-party system. Democrats and Whigs are now the new political parties, and Democrats clung to state rights with federal restraint. Whigs favored renewed national bank, protected tariffs, internal improvements, public schools, and increasingly moral reforms such as the prohibition of liquor and eventually the abolition of slavery. So these two sentences are so important to understand the difference. Remember, Democrats are always about states' rights. Okay, it's so different today because Republicans are about states' rights today, but back then it was Democrats. Okay, so this is shortly chapter 13. I know I was kind of speeding, so try to listen to this and along as at the same time you are reading the text. Okay, we have chapter 14 here. Um, this is forging a national economy. So national means it's trying to unite all the regions, the economic regions of America together. And how do you make that work together without having to go against each other? Because that's what's really going on here. So this is all about the economy from 1790 to 1860. It's a period of 7 years economy. First of all, there is a westward movement. People are moving west because as they're traveling, buying land. Remember, the Louisiana Purchase, there's a lot of land to live in, and it's getting pretty crowded in the East Coast. So we can call it the demographic center, meaning that there is a particular road that they take and they populate near the main road, right? Because the main road, you can easily access the markets. So you call that the demographic center, and it's going to be shown in that map. There's also this movement of rugged individualism. Like these guys weren't cowards, they weren't scared. This is the Ralph Waldo Emerson theory or philosophy, self-reliance, to show that they don't need help. They're not helpless people. They're very brave and they can go out there. But actually, it's a little different when they actually do go there. There's also Kentucky bluegrass, things that are changing in this. The things they changed the landscape. They burned all the fields and they planted a European grass and it did well. So you can call this exploitation of all the environment, all the fur, all the buffaloes, all the sea otters. You can call this ecological imperialism. They pretty much just ripped off the environment from its place. Okay, so they really changed the outlook of America, the environment and the geography, and also they took a lot of the natural habitat out of the way. You can see how the population grew here. White population, 20 million, and the non-white, this much. Okay, so pretty soon they're starting to realize that this way of life that was in this region was really profound. This way of life, this environment needs to be preserved. So actually, George Catlin will be the first to propose a national park system, beginning with Yellowstone Park in 1872. They're realizing, hey, we should kind of preserve the nature of America before we destroy it all or exploit all of its resources. Now, America is starting to become the populated nation in the world. Okay, the fourth most populated is growing. Um, yes, the fourth most populated nation in the Western world, actually. And also, cities are growing. So on the East Coast, there were the first cities. So New Orleans, the Queen of the South, New York, the metropolis, Chicago, the city in the Midwest. People are moving mainly in these places, and it's growing. Boston and a lot of people. Now, what happens when so much people live in one place, right? It's hard to control. It's hard to even police them. And a lot of them are immigrants, like Irish and German people, because they stay within the city near the port. They're too afraid to venture off any further than that. And when these immigrants would come in, they would write these letters called the American letters, and they would describe American life as better than their life in Europe. They would have no taxes or low taxes, no compulsory military service like the other nations would force, 3 meat meals a day. They would eat meat a lot. So this is unlikely in other countries, only in America. The Emerald Isle moves west. Now, this is about Ireland. Now, there was a huge emigration of or people moving out of Ireland because there was this potato famine. So this potato famine happened in the 1840s. So thousands of Irish people left. So you call this the Black 40s. A very sad kind of thing that happened. A lot of Irish people were the population decreased. They starved to death. They disappeared. They rank as one of the diasporas of the Jews and the Africans. Even the Irish people are one of them. Okay, and a lot of the Irish people lived in Boston, New York, and that's why we have like Boston police who have this Irish accent. Okay, now these Irish people were Catholic people, so they weren't welcomed by the Protestants in Boston. So you're gonna have a lot of these gang wars between Irish and so-called Puritan blood or American blood who was there first, British people. Okay, so there was a lot of persecution against the Irish. They didn't hire them. They didn't want to give them any jobs, so they suffered a lot. So they had to form some sort of lobby or a political group. First, they formed an organization called the Ancient Order of Hibernians, a semi-secret society founded in Ireland, and then they went in America, and they formed an Irish Miners Union. All right, and they also was able to get some political voice, and they met in New York's Tammany Hall, and they started to say, hey, let's all work in these places, police departments, so they can become a political force. So that's the Irish people. And also in the 40s, the German 48ers. So besides them, besides the Irish, the Germans came in because they were trying to have a democratic revolution in 1848, hoping to bring democracy. Unfortunately, it didn't work. So a lot of them just fled, went to America. A lot of them was led by Carl Schurz, who traveled there. Wisconsin, where they settled, was established, where most of them lived, a lot of them. And the Germans even brought some cultural things like the Conestoga wagon, the Kentucky rifle. They even brought the Christmas tree. All this were German contributions. This wasn't American culture. They even brought the concept of kindergarten so children could start being educated at an early age. So it's just about the Irish here. And how did the people fare about this? How did they react? So you call this nativists. Now, they're not talking about Native Americans. These nativists felt that they were the true Americans. These are basically the descendants of the British. And there's a lot of anti-foreignism because, first of all, Irish and German people are coming in, and especially the Irish, they're taking away the jobs. And when they want to protest, the Irish will just say, hey, if you're not going to work, then I'm going to take your job. So there was a lot of anti-foreignism going on, and especially the Irish because they were Catholic. Okay, so remember, it was a predominantly Protestant country until the Irish made increase of Catholicism, and now the Catholic faith ranked fifth. So behind the Baptists, Methodists, Presbyterians, and Congregationalists. So this Nativist Party formed the Order of the Star Spangled Banner. That's their organization, but they were called by others as the Know Nothing Party. So because they were pretty much against their race, so they supported strict restrictions for immigration and also strict naturalization laws, like hard to become an American. It would give them time, and if they weren't, they would easily deport them. Okay, so they were trying to forge that political group. So you can see how there's been a lot of political movement going on in these areas. They even burned down a Catholic church, so it was pretty serious. Okay, creeping mechanization. In a sense, this is America's industrial revolution, right? They're going through this. They're creating this modern factory system. Okay, labor was generally scarce, so they had to use the machines. Okay, the immigrants would come in and become those workers in the machines. Okay, so those who were there, the British enjoyed the monopoly of the textile industry. The British factories had this factory that they created, and they want to do the same in America. So the guy who's going to bring in the factory system is Samuel Slater. He's going to memorize how to make a factory in America. He's moving to America. He memorizes what it needs, and then he reconstruct everything. And then he started to plant factories all over the rivers like this. America's textile mill, using river as a hydroelectric power, spinning the turbines. And then they would get cotton to spin this. And Eli Whitney, born in Massachusetts, he also made his mark by inventing the cotton gin. Instead of picking out the seeds with your hands, you could just buy this machine and you can roll it, and then it'll take out the seeds naturally from this. So slave driving planters cleared more acres of cotton, pushing the cotton kingdom westward. So now the cotton is now the new industry. It grew better and more than tobacco, and it's mainly in Alabama and Mississippi, in that region. You call them the bottomlands, or like those three southern states. Okay, so the factories flourished in New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, became very manufacturing, while in the South it was cotton. So they kind of work together, right? Cotton goes to the textile mills in Massachusetts, New York, and New Jersey. Okay. Okay, and so America started to move out of this idea of farming and more of the idea of manufacturing. So the British were worried about that, so they tried to kill the factories of America. And how do you do that? If the factories don't make money by selling their products, well, how do you get the Americans to not buy American products? Well, the British makes their prices very low prices, so the Americans wouldn't buy American goods, but rather buy British goods. So there was still this competition, America versus Britain, economically. Okay. But America still overcame that and had a lot of good manufacturing capabilities, mass production, assembly line methods, even the idea of interchangeable parts. Now, back then, it would take one person to make a product. But what if all of the parts to to an object, to a manufactured good. What if you can make all the parts the same, and then if you mass produce that, you don't have to make every part unique? For example, a gun or a musket. Let's say all the barrels are the same sizes, all the triggers are the same sizes, all of the parts of the gun are all, the butt of the gun same sizes. So all you have to do is just connect the parts all together, and it'll be easier to work. Another invention, Elias Howe with the sewing machine, again, to make women at home to even make more clothes and sell them. Isaac Singer give another strong boost to industrialization for the sewing machine. So these are big things to improve America's economy. There was so much money that there was 15 Boston families that formed like investment capitals. To call them the Boston Associates, and they pretty much dominated textile, railroad, insurance, and banking businesses. So all of these are like investment big companies. Like if you want to start a business, you could borrow money from them, and then they'll lend you the money, but then you have to pay back, the profit. Another big invention is Samuel F.B. Morse for the telegraph. And this was a big deal because instead of sending a message by riding a horse, giving it to the next horse, and so forth, that would take days. But now the telegraph was able to transport a message through wires. And we know that works through the telephone, and then now we even have a cell phone. But it was when they sent, and there was a device connected to the end of a copper wire, and they could produce electric signals. Okay? Workers and wage slaves. So there's some workers and wage slaves. And instead of people making, like the old apprentice learns from the master, and then they learn, and then they pass it on, and then he becomes a master. That's now done away with. Machines are just going to replace them. And you call the people running the machines, they'll be getting paid a wage that's going to be the same, like $10 an hour, $5 an hour. So it doesn't matter if you produce thousands of goods, you still get paid $5 an hour. And it doesn't matter if you only sell one product, you still get paid $5 an hour. So this wage slave is like, it doesn't matter how much profit you make in the company, you still get paid the same wage, which is today, right? We all have wage slaves. But the hours are long, the wages were low, and the meals were short, and they have to eat fast. So this, wage was very difficult to get more money. Of course, you can protest, form a union, and protest against the employer, but they would regard that criminal activity to go against the boss. And of course, those rights are going to be given to these workers later. Children were also working. They had whipping rooms for the children. The children didn't do their jobs well. They had to work 10 hours a day, bad working conditions. Okay, and there was nothing for the employers to do for their kids or for the workers. So they tried to have a strike in the 1830s, 1840s for the wages, but there would always be strike breakers to strike them down. Especially foreigners would sign up to be a strike breaker. So if an employee would want to go against the employer to demand for better wages, better safety conditions, less hours, you can try to protest altogether and hey, let's all stop working, and the company won't make profit, but they would send a strike breaker. So they went to court, Commonwealth versus Hunt, and then they said that labor unions can be formed as long as it's honorable and peaceful. So this was a big step for the labor unions. Now they could protest. So this could be a threat to the employer, so they could give in or make deals with the workers. Okay, women. So now women start to work. Now remember, there's this idea, the cult of domesticity, that women should just stay home when they're married, raise the children. But now girls, before they're married, they can work. They were factory girls. Okay, so they started to go to work, but the work would build a boarding house near the workplace. So the girls could live in the boarding house, a bunch of young women, and just go to work. Okay, so these women could support a family. About 10% of white women were working for pay outside their own homes. And a lot of them were outside the idea of the cult of domesticity. But because of the work, the fertility rate dropped, right? And so now not many children were being born. Okay. But then there was also a movement, domestic feminism, to say, hey, there's nothing, let's have fewer children and let's raise fewer children, so it's okay. And then parents now also spared the rod, meaning they didn't discipline them so harshly. It didn't spoil their children. They wanted to raise them well. So this was an American idea because the Europeans were very strict and didn't allow anything. But America says, we could teach them without breaking them. So they decided to become children-centered, affectionate. Okay, Western farmers reap revolution in the fields. So we have the Trans-Allegheny region, Ohio and Indiana, Illinois, becoming the nation's breadbasket. So around the Great Lakes, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, this is where Chicago's at, they were growing a lot of corn, and the hogs would eat the corn. So a lot of hogs would be, raised. And Cincinnati was called Porkopolis. So it was starting to become a lot of food. And then John Deere invented the steel plow to, plow better. Cyrus McCormick, mechanical reaper, a horse pulling thick blades, so you can do the work of more farming men. And now farming is not just for farming for your families, your 5 and 6 household, that's subsistence farming. Now it's specialized farming, which specialized farming is this: when you farm to sell your product, to sell your crops, to sell your corn. That's why you're farming. You're not just going to feed your family. That's barely even the reason. You're using it to sell it to the world so you can become rich that way. So that's specialized farming. Okay. So food production. What about highways and steamboats? So they are now building roads and also the beginning of a highway, the Lancaster Turnpike. If you guys ever go to like a country, you have to pay a toll to use the road because you have to maintain the road. So that's the Lancaster Turnpike. Okay, and they would turn a spike, and then the carriage would be allowed to use the road. 62 miles westward from Philadelphia to Lancaster, and they would buy all that land, but you have to pay to use that road. Okay, one pesky roadblock was the noisy state riders who opposed federal aid to local projects. Okay, so they built these roads, National Road, Cumberland Road, here to here, here to here, and they would make people pay to use it. There are still countries that still do that. The Philippines, you have the SLEX and all that stuff, even in America. Robert Fulton, he is going to invent the steam engine, and the steamboat will be used. Now, why a steamboat is so important? Because a steamboat, you can go upstream. In a regular boat, you would only go downstream, right? So a steamboat was able to defy the wind, wave, and tide and go instead of just going down current. And now they could trade up the Mississippi River, pick up the goods, and go down into the Mississippi River and exit out of New Orleans into the Gulf of Mexico and then into Europe or whatever place they need to trade. So going up and down the Mississippi River with a steamboat was a big improvement. It could sell more products faster. Okay. Now building a canal, Clinton's big ditch in New York. Now canals are waterways that are built, right? They man-made waterways, so it's not like a river that they follow. They would build a canal, and the canals would be connected to the Great Lakes, and the Great Lakes would be connected to the Hudson River. The Hudson River would be connected to New York, and New York could ship out. Now the Great Lakes are like almost like in the middle part of America, so a lot of farmers live around there. If they could ship their goods through a man-made waterway, which is the Erie Canal, then they can make a lot of money. So they finally connected the Great Lakes to New York's waters, and now they can ship anything. So from Buffalo, New York, okay, they can now ship for only $5 instead of $100 that they used before. So they could save a lot of money. So this is where they would build it. All this waterways they built. It's like they build their own rivers basically for a ship to go through. Comes out of New York, ends up in the Hudson River, then comes out. Okay, that's the Erie Canal. Okay, so basically they can now taste the potatoes from around the Great Lakes and the meals there because they could ship it there now. How about the Iron Horse? Now canals were also a form of transportation, but what's even better are the railroads. They started to appear all over. 32 years later, the United States boasted 30,000 miles of railroad track. So now people could travel even more to these places and live, and cities are becoming more populated as they moved into those places. Okay, cables, Pony Riders, Cyrus Field, the wire puller in history. So in the Atlantic Ocean, from Canada to Ireland, there's a wire that's lying in the bottom of the ocean floor. Okay, and in that wire, they could transport some cables. They could send messages in those cables. Even right now, we have that. That's how we have the internet. It's mostly cables. 80% is cables. It's not like the satellites giving internet. No, that's like barely satellite internet's like barely even used. There's cables in the ocean that's used as the main internet. Okay, and the clipper ships are also a big invention. Faster ships like this. They can travel better. And the Pony Express, 2,000 lonely miles from Missouri to California. So St. Joseph, Missouri to California, just basically that's how they transfer the mail. The long horses would be doing this. There was no telegraph in this side of America, so when they sent a message, they had to have a Pony Express. Horses would have their stations, and they would give the messages. So we call this the transportation revolution. They can call that the transportation revolution, because of the transportation. Some call it the market revolution because of the economy. So this is basically a revolution from this time of both kinds. Okay, so that's it for this chapter. All right, so here we are with chapter 15, the ferment and reform and culture. This is about the culture, meaning we could talk about religion and the beliefs, and also new philosophies in American behavior. All of this is about what Americans' uniqueness in their culture. So chapter 16 is all about, chapter 15 is all about that culture. Okay, so actually, this is the religion comes out strong because there's a lot of philosophies and ideas and people who attack religion, especially the Bible, because science is starting to become more popular, more profound, and then they would even go against the Bible in itself. And so some people have to think: is this science real? Is this a moment? Is this a time of truth? But it just made the church stronger in the sense that there were more people attending church and wanting to find out the truth about the Bible, and so a lot of theologies were beginning to be created, and a lot of camping meetings are going on. And of course, all of these revivals and the camp meetings that are happening is going to lead to other cultural reforms. Okay, so a lot of them are preaching, and then they'll also change other things too. Um, so let's go see what specifically culturally was being changed. Um, okay, so remember how they had a first Great Awakening under Jonathan Edwards in the 1740s? They're having kind of like another one in the early 1800s, the Second Great Awakening in a sense. And this time, it's more about getting people to have a free will and wanting to choose to be converted, choose to be saved instead of letting God choose. Now they know that they can choose themselves. So this is kind of like a new thing. This is different than Calvinism that's being created. So remember, so it starts with science, and then church gets stronger, and now more denominations are being created. For example, the Seventh Day Adventists, back then they were called the Millerites because they were founded by William Miller, and they also have more revivals: Episcopalians, Presbyterians, Congregationalists, Unitarians, Methodists, Baptists. So a lot of these communities are having their own revivals, and then churches also split because of different, beliefs and everything. Joseph Smith, and this section also has its own talk about Joseph Smith, which is the Mormon Church, the Church of Jesus Christ and Latter Day Saints. This church is started by a young man who said he had a vision of an angel, and now it grew. And then they started actually somewhere in the east, from New York and Missouri, but they were being persecuted for their belief because of they practiced polygamy or accused of polygamy, which is having more than one wife. And because of this accusation, they killed the owner or the founder. So then the second in charge was Brigham Young, and they decided to just, hey, let's just move out and let's just go to Utah. Actually, they didn't know they were going to Utah. They just knew they had to travel west. They ended up in Utah, Salt Lake, and yeah, they said the seagulls were there, and so this is a sign from God. So 5,000 people settled there. That's the beginning of the Mormon Church. Of course, eventually they were suffering because there was a lot of anti-polygamy laws against them because they said you cannot marry more than one wife. The Mormons had relationships in secret about this. Yeah, so that was a big thing for the Mormon Church. And also, there was also public schools. Now, public schools weren't mandatory and public; they were like private, many of them, and no one paid the public school. So now the tax is saying now our taxes are going to start paying for them, and that started at this time. So this is America, they said. So we should afford the education for everyone. And so a lot of people didn't like that to give free education, to use their own taxes for the education. But they said, hey, if you're going to have people to vote properly, you got to educate them. So yes, they had the Red Schoolhouse. The beginning of these schools are starting to make it mandatory for everyone to attend school. This is the Mormon Trail. So you can see them moving from Illinois to Missouri, all the way to landed in Utah right here. Okay. Okay, so yeah, school teachers, again, continuing, boarded around 3 Rs. All of these guys are the ones that are famous people. Like Horace Mann says that school was actually not just for curriculum, but is its ultimate purpose is to make them ready to be in society. So teach them moral things. Okay, until today it's all science, math, and all these things that are not character education. But back then it was character education. Oh, okay, so those were the forms of education. It's basically to make them more patriotic. Okay. How about liberal arts colleges? Yes, at the beginning, a lot of these colleges. So women started to attend colleges before they were against it, and now women fought for them. They started to have universities for women and seminaries for women, tax-supported libraries. So this is a big change in education. Even here in Oberlin College, you see the first African American in this class picture. She was educated in the college. It may not seem like a big step, but back then it was a great step because they wouldn't allow that. So this was an age of reform. And what we mean by reform is they were reforming laws that weren't made. They were just they were there, but no one said anything about these things that needed to change. For example, people would go to jail for their debt, and there was a lot of kind of bad things that were happening in prisons. There was whipping and branding, penitentiary. They were like not even treating them right, these prisoners, until women came in and says, "Hey, this is wrong." That was Dorothea Dix. Says, if they are insane, you have to know the difference between someone who has a mental problem and someone who's really needs to go to prison. So they separated the two, and it should be a place for correction, not just jailing people. So they should learn how to change their ways in the prison. Okay, so and they have to know what an asylum is for. Now in these insane asylums, they just put these people there, but sometimes their cell will be so rotting and there's poo everywhere, and it was so bad, and no one took care of them, and so they would even get sick and die. So this was one of the problems there in those places until Dorothy Dix became their voice. Okay. Of course, there's also the movement of prohibition. The drinking problem was a big deal. A lot of domestic and family abuse, of course, mainly by the husband, and women and children would suffer. So the women formed the American Temperance Society to go against prohibition. So they tried to encourage the husbands and fathers to stop drinking. Even children joined in cold water army to offer cold water to the father instead and to stop these guys from drinking. Okay. Uncle Tom's Cabin, very famous bestseller. Um, so, yes, this is the beginning of the prohibition. Even people in the business want to stop prohibition. Okay. So here it just talks about the kind of women rights movement that was going on in these areas. A lot of women start to change their culture. There was this common lifestyle, but then women start to say, hey, we should have some more rights and more freedoms. We don't have to dress or wear dresses. We don't have to lose our last name, and we could even wear pants like men. So there's something called a bloomer. They would wear it under their skirt. These women, Lucretia Mott, Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, all of these guys are trying to lecture for women's rights. Okay. Okay, so they went to a convention. They formed the Declaration of Sentiments to let everyone know that all men and women are created equal. Okay, and they wanted to say that we should be treated equally and not like we are lower. So women starts to gain more respect in that sense. And also, there's this movement for creating that utopia. People want to create that perfect city or town, but it was very difficult to do. But they tried to have a perfect town. Like, for example, Brook Farm. There's people who want to live under the philosophy of transcendentalism, meaning separate from the city and the busy life and just live plain living and high thinking. Like, we don't need these material things in our life. We just got to focus on our mind and to improve that and get smart. And they want to form a society about that. Also, the United Community, a different society, free love, complex marriage, birth control. Okay, the eugenic selection of parents to produce superior offspring. This is where they thought that if a father was very educated and a mother was very educated, it would naturally produce superior offspring. Like, they would just magically inherit all those intelligent traits. And they tried to do that, really. Shakers also, they also started this religious group, Shakers, to create their own towns. They prohibited both marriage and sexual relations. So obviously they'll be extinct later because no children will be born. Also, America's known for their scientific achievement. This is just some guys here who achieved some things for America. J. Audubon recorded the birds of all of America. So this is about the culture. People who would become, study these things and create big things for for American culture. Yes. Artistic achievements. Now, just generally, you could just read these little highlights. You notice I didn't put any color because these are all just general. What kind of art is American art? So, on music, this is what's famous here. Back then, they would just draw people frozen, right? But now they start to draw the landscape. They figured that was beautiful. And even started the photograph, and taking pictures as it was. And music by African Americans started to become popular. Here, this section is all about books and authors. So it's pretty straightforward, famous books. Maybe there's some that you guys would have to read in high school. The Last of the Mohicans, famous novel by American author. The famous one was Transcendentalism. This is the kind of a culture that was brewing in America: self-reliance, self-culture, self-discipline, the dignity of the individual. This means like this is man's all to just become independent and focused, disciplined, not like out of control, cultivated, not given into desire so much. This is what they felt that they had to transcend. Okay. Of course, people try to really live like this. Henry David Thoreau is one example. Okay. Again, it's just more literature, people writing books. So, this textbook just puts just popular Americans, popular writers, and tries to put them all here. Okay. Some of these books you would have to read, like maybe in middle school, you read Edgar Allan Poe, The Raven, The Gold Pug, The Fall of the House of Usher. Very dark kinds of feelings, which no one would really write about. And even Moby Dick, some adventures that people wouldn't write about what happens in the ocean. Now they started to do that. Scarlet Letter. A lot of it's like not happy stories now. They feel like you can write sad and depressing stories and have a good ending still. So that kind of changed. Okay, even history writers. Okay. So yeah, it's pretty short. It's just you'll see a bunch of accomplishments by people, but that's part of the culture of America. Okay. All right. We'll just end with that.